Welcome to the deep dive. So today we're digging into a really relevant issue. The Dutch cabinet looking at its association agreement with Israel.
And specifically, we're focusing on Geert Wilder's reaction to all this.
Exactly. Our main source here is an interview transcript from De Telegraaf's YouTube channel. Wilders gives quite a strong response to these potential policy changes.
He does, and the core of it, really, is the Dutch foreign minister, Minister Veldkamp, suggesting they might not extend that agreement.
Right, based on concerns about the human rights situation in Gaza.
Precisely. So our mission today, in this deep dive, is to really unpack Wilder's arguments. What's his reasoning? What does his view tell us about, the complexities of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
Okay, so let's start right there with his immediate reaction. He seemed, well, pretty unhappy.
Definitely not pleased. He stated quite clearly that he and his party, the PVV, weren't told beforehand.
Which sounds like a procedural issue, but also maybe something more.
Well, yeah, he called the potential decision incredibly wrong. That goes beyond just not being informed.
Incredibly wrong.
Okay.
And against the spirit of their agreements, I think he said.
Exactly. So right off the bat, you can hear his fundamental disagreement. He wasn't just surprised. He fundamentally opposed the idea.
And he framed it immediately around the human rights situation in Gaza.
Yes, he zeroes in on that as the justification he sees being used, and it's a point he revisits. So for you listening, it sets up this immediate tension. Dutch government human rights concerns versus Wilder's interpretation.
Okay, and talk about Gaza. He had some pretty strong views on the aid situation there.
Very strong. He claims, and it's a striking number, that 99% of aid doesn't actually reach the people it's meant for.
99%. Wow. He blames Hamas interception for that.
Yes, he alleges it's intercepted by Hamas. And because of that, he finds this potential move on the association agreement awkward.
Awkward, and something he wouldn't have done himself.
Right. So you see, he directly connects his view on aid, that it's being diverted by Hamas, to why he thinks targeting the association agreement is the wrong approach.
So his argument is, if Hamas is the problem with aid, why penalize Israel on humanitarian grounds?
Essentially, yes. It highlights that really central debate. Who bears responsibility for the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, and what are the right levers to pull?
He does talk about supporting Israel, calls them an ally.
He does.
But he adds a caveat, right? It's not unconditional support.
Exactly. And this is, I think, a really crucial part of his position. He brings up international law.
Specifically regarding food.
Yes, preventing food from reaching a population facing hunger. He suggests Israel needs to be held accountable to those norms.
So it's kind of balancing act, supporting an ally, but also insisting on adherence to international law.
It seems so. He's not just giving a blank check. He acknowledges the need for accountability, even for allies, which, adds complexity. He even talks about protecting democracies like Israel from straying from the law.
And he mentions something about a parliamentary majority supporting the minister.
He notes that, yes, acknowledging the political reality, even while disagreeing.
But then he pivots back quite strongly to Hamas.
Consistently, he emphasizes repeatedly that Hamas is a terrorist organization.
And links everything back to October 7th.
Yes, he stresses that those attacks are the fundamental reason, the context for Israel's current actions. He seems concerned that Hamas's role is getting lost in the discussion.
So in his view, focusing only on the humanitarian situation ignores the trigger.
That seems to be his argument. He's framing Israel's response as a direct result of October 7th, and by constantly labeling Hamas as terrorists, he's providing, or attempting to provide, a justification for Israel's campaign.
Okay, then he gets practical. He asks, well, if Israel has blockades, how does aid get in anyway?
It's a fair question, logistically, and he brings up what he says is Israel's proposal.
To work with other organizations.
Right. Reliable, independent groups, like the UN, to manage aid delivery. To ensure it gets to people, he says, but without Hamas controlling it.
So, highlighting Israel's stated position, wanting aid to reach civilians, but deeply worried about Hamas benefiting.
Exactly. It underscores the huge mistrust and the, frankly, immense practical difficulties of aid delivery in that kind of active conflict zone.
Now, thinking about the actual impact of not extending this association agreement, Wilder seemed to downplay the direct effect.
Yeah, he suggested it wasn't in itself a hugely impactful measure, like the practical consequences might be limited.
Oh.
But, he said, the signal it sends is huge. He believes it's choosing the wrong side.
So the symbolism is the key thing, True.
It seems so. More than any immediate economic or political fallout, it's the message, the political alignment that he sees as deeply problematic. He thinks it aligns the Netherlands incorrectly.
And he kept returning to Hamas as an ongoing threat.
Definitely. Reiterating, terrorist organization committing terrible acts now.
He brought up the hostages, too.
Yes, the remaining hostages held by Hamas. He contrasted that situation with the release of an American hostage, sort of underlining the continuing human cost and brutality from his perspective.
Acknowledging the complexity, the difficulty of resolving anything.
The hostage issue serves as that stark reminder in his narrative of ongoing aggression and the deep challenges.
Okay, towards the end, he seemed to try and balance things a bit.
Yes, he made a point of saying that criticizing specific Israeli actions doesn't mean you're defending Hamas.
So, drawing a distinction.
A clear one. He condemns Hamas very strongly. Terrible, nasty, cruel organization using its own people as shields, he says.
But at the same time.
At the same time, he expresses concern for innocent children in Gaza suffering from lack of food. He acknowledges their situation needs to be considered.
So trying to navigate that really difficult ethical line.
I think that's exactly what he's attempting, rejecting a simple binary. You're either 100% with Israel or you're siding with Hamas. He's acknowledging the civilian suffering, particularly children, caught in the middle. And it's important, for you listening to grasp that tension he's describing.
Right. So if we sort of summarize the core tensions he highlighted, it's that difficulty of supporting an ally while also upholding international law.
That's one key strand.
And then the huge challenge of getting humanitarian aid where it's needed without potentially empowering a group designated as terrorists.
Exactly. How do you separate those things in practice?
And just the sheer overarching complexity of this conflict, so many layers, so much history.
Definitely. His statements really throw these multifaceted dilemmas into sharp relief. It's not presented as simple right versus wrong. There are competing priorities, difficult trade-offs.
So it leaves us, and you listening, with a pretty challenging thought, doesn't it? When you have these incredibly complex international conflicts, how do you balance those geopolitical alliances with basic humanitarian needs and the rules of international law? What does it actually mean, practically, to hold an ally accountable?
And how can aid be delivered effectively when non-state actors, like Hamas in this context, are deeply embedded in the area?
Yeah. No easy answers there at all.
Yeah.
Something that definitely requires more thought.